The Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress is a four-engine heavy bomber developed in the 1930s for the United States Army Air Corps, competing against Douglas and Martin for a contract to build 200 bombers. The Boeing entry outperformed both competitors and exceeded the Air Corps' performance specifications. Although Boeing lost the contract because the prototype crashed, the Air Corps was so impressed with Boeing's design that it ordered 13 more B-17s for further evaluation. From its introduction in 1938, the B-17 Flying Fortress evolved through numerous design advances. The B-17 was primarily employed by the United States Army Air Forces in the daylight precision strategic bombing campaign of World War II against German industrial and military targets. The United States 8th Air Force, based at many airfields in central and southern England, and the 15th Air Force, based in Italy, complemented the RAF Bomber Command's nighttime area bombing in the combined bomber offensive to help secure air superiority over the cities, factories and battlefields of Western Europe in preparation for the invasion of France in 1944. The B-17 also participated to a lesser extent in the war in the Pacific, early in World War II, where it conducted raids against Japanese shipping and airfields. From its pre-war inception, the USAAC promoted the aircraft as a strategic weapon. It was a fast, high-flying, long-range bomber that was able to defend itself, carried a very good bomb load, and was able to return home despite extensive battle damage. Its reputation quickly took on mythic proportions, and widely circulated stories and photos of notable numbers and examples of B-17s surviving battle damage increased its iconic status, with a service ceiling greater than any of its Allied contemporaries. The B-17 established itself as an effective weapons system, dropping more bombs than any other U.S. aircraft in World War II. Of the 1.5 million tons of bombs dropped on Germany and its occupied territories by U.S. aircraft, 640,000 tons were dropped from B-17s. In addition to its role as a bomber, the B-17 was also employed as a transport, anti-submarine warfare platform, drone controller, and search and rescue aircraft. As of May 2015, 10 aircraft remained airworthy. None of them are combat veterans. Additionally, a few dozen more are in storage or on static display. The oldest is a D-series combat veteran with service in the Pacific and the Caribbean. Development origins: on 8 August 1934, the U.S. Army Air Corps tendered a proposal for a multi-engine bomber to replace the Martin B-10. The Air Corps was looking for a bomber capable of reinforcing the air forces in Hawaii, Panama, and Alaska. Requirements were that it would carry a useful bomb load at an altitude of 10,000 feet for 10 hours with a top speed of at least 200 miles per hour. They also desired, but did not require, a range of 2,000 miles and a speed of 250 miles per hour. The competition for the Air Corps contract would be decided by fly-off between Boeing's design, the Douglas DB-1, and the Martin Model 146 at Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio. The prototype B-17, with the Boeing factory designation of Model 299, was designed by a team of engineers led by E. Gifford Emery and Edward Curtis Wells, and was built at Boeing's own expense. It combined features of the experimental Boeing XB-15 bomber with the Boeing 247 transport transport aircraft. The B-17's armament consisted of up to 4,800 pounds of bombs on 2 racks in the bomb bay behind the cockpit, and initially possessed 5 0.30 inches machine guns. It was powered by 4 Pratt & Whitney R1690 Hornet radial engines, each producing 750 horsepower at 7,000 feet. The first flight of the Model 299 was on the 28th of July 1935 with Boeing Chief Test Pilot Leslie Tower at the controls. Richard Williams, a reporter for the Seattle Times, coined the name Flying Fortress when the Model 299 was rolled out, bristling with multiple machine gun installations. The most unusual gun emplacement was the nose installation, which allowed the single machine gun to be fired toward almost any frontal angle. Boeing was quick to see the value of the name and had it trademarked for use. Boeing also claimed in some of the early press releases that Model 299 was the first combat aircraft that could continue its mission if one of its 4 engines failed. On the 20th of August 1935, the prototype flew from Seattle to Wright Field in 9 hours and 3 minutes at an average cruising speed of 252 miles per hour, much faster than the competition. At the flyover, the 4-engine Boeing's performance was superior to those of the twin-engine DB-1 and Model 146. Major General Frank Maxwell Andrews of the GHQ Air Force believed that the long-range capabilities of 4-engine large aircraft were more effective than shorter-ranged twin-engine aircraft, and that the B-17 was better suited to new emerging USAAC doctrine. His opinions were shared by the Air Corps procurement offices, and even before the competition had finished they suggested buying 65 B-17s. Development continued on the Boeing Model 299, and on the 30th of October 1935, Army Air Corps test pilot Major Ployer Peter Hill and Boeing employee Les Tower took the Model 299 on a second evaluation flight. A crew forgot to disengage the gust locks, a system of devices integral to the design that held the bomber's movable control surfaces in place while the aircraft was parked on the ground. After takeoff, due to the failure to manually disengage all of the gust locks, the aircraft entered a steep climb, stalled, nosed over, and crashed, killing Hill and Tower. The crashed Model 299 could not finish the evaluation, and while the Air Corps was still enthusiastic about the aircraft's potential, Army officials were daunted by the much greater expense per aircraft, and as the competition could not be completed, Boeing was legally disqualified from consideration for the contract. Army Chief of Staff Malin Craig cancelled the order for 65 YB-17s, and ordered 133 of the twin-engine Douglas B-18 Bolo instead. The loss was not total, but Boeing's hopes for a substantial bomber contract were dashed. Initial orders regardless, the USAAC had been impressed by the prototype's performance, and on the 17th of January 1936, through a legal loophole, the Air Corps ordered 13 YB-17s for service testing. The YB-17 incorporated a number of significant changes from the Model 299, including more powerful Wright R-1820-39 Cyclone engines replacing the original Pratt & Whitneys. Although the prototype was company-owned and never received a military serial, the term XB-17 was retroactively applied to the airframe and has entered the lexicon to describe the first Flying Fortress. Between the 1st of March and the 4th of August 1937, 12 of the 13 Y-1 B-17s were delivered to the 2nd Bombardment Group at Langley Field in Virginia for operational development and flight tests. One suggestion adopted was the use of a pre-flight checklist to avoid accidents such as that which befell the Model 299. In one of the first missions, 3 B-17s, directed by Lead Navigator Lieutenant Curtis LeMay, were sent by General Andreas to intercept and photograph the Italian ocean liner Rex 610 miles off the Atlantic coast. The mission was successful and widely publicized. The 13th Y-1 B-17 was delivered to the Material Division at Wright Field, Ohio, to be used for flight testing. A 14th Y-1 B-17, originally constructed for ground testing of the airframe's strength, was upgraded and fitted with exhaust-driven turbochargers. Scheduled to fly in 1937, it encountered problems with the turbochargers, and its first flight was delayed until the 29th of April 1938. The aircraft was delivered to the Army on the 31st of January 1939. Once service testing was complete, the Y-1 B-17s and Y-1 B-17A were redesignated B-17 and B-17A respectively to signify the change to operational status. Opposition to the Air Corps' ambitions for the acquisition of more B-17s faded, and in late 1937, 10 more aircraft designated B-17B were ordered to equip 2 bombardment groups, one on each U.S. coast, improved with larger flaps, rudder and a well-framed 10-panel plexiglass nose. The B-17Bs were delivered in 5 small batches between July 1939 and March 1940. In July 1940, an order for 512 B-17s was issued. However, prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor, fewer than 200 B-17s were in service with the Army. A total of 155 B-17s of all variants were delivered between the 11th of January 1937 and the 30th of November 1941, but production quickly accelerated, with the B-17 eventually achieving the highest production rate for any large aircraft. The aircraft went on to serve in every World War II combat zone, and by the time production ended in May 1945, 12,731 aircraft had been built by Boeing, Douglas and Vega. Though the crash of the prototype 299 in 1935 had almost wiped out Boeing, now it was seen as a boon. Instead of building models based on experimental engineering, Boeing had been hard at work developing the bomber and now had versions ready for production far better than would have been possible otherwise. One of the most significant weapons of World War II would be ready, but only by hair. Design and variants. The aircraft went through several alterations in each of its design stages and variants. Of the 13 B-17s ordered for service testing, 12 were used by the 2nd Bomb Group of Langley Field, Virginia, to develop heavy bombing techniques, and the 13th was used for flight testing at the Material Division at Wright Field, Ohio. Experiments on this aircraft led to the use of a quartet of turbo superchargers which would become standard on the B-17 line. A 14th aircraft, the YB-17A, originally destined for ground testing only and upgraded with the turbochargers, was redesignated B-17A after testing had finished. As the production line developed, Boeing engineers continued to improve upon the basic design. To enhance performance at slower speeds, the B-17B was altered to include larger rudders and flaps. The B-17C changed from 3 bulged, oval-shaped machine gun blisters to 2 flush, oval-shaped machine gun window openings and a single bathtub machine gun gondola housing focusing on the lower fuselage, that resembled the similarly configured and located ventral defensive emplacement on the German Heinkel He-111P series medium bomber. Models A through D of the B-17 were designed defensively, while the large-tailed B-17E was the first model primarily focused on offensive warfare. The B-17E was an extensive revision of the Model 299 design. The fuselage was extended by 10 feet, a much larger rear fuselage, vertical tail fin, rudder, and horizontal stabilizer were added to the design. A gunner's position was added in the new tail. The nose remained relatively the same as the earlier B through D versions had, but with the addition of a spare electrically powered manned dorsal gun turret just behind the cockpit, and the similarly powered manned ventral bowl turret just after the bomb bay, replacing a relatively hard-to-use, Bendix-designed remotely operated ventral turret on the earliest examples of the E variant, that had also been used on the earlier marks of the North American B-25 Mitchell, resulted in a 20% increase in aircraft weight. The B-17's turbocharged Wright R-1820 Cyclone 9 engines were upgraded to increasingly more powerful versions of the same power plants multiple times throughout its production, and similarly, the number of machine gun emplacement locations was increased to enhance their aircraft's combat effectiveness. The B-17F variants were the primary versions flying for the 8th Air Force to face the Germans in 1943, and had standardized the manned Sperry bowl turret for ventral defense, replacing the earlier 10-panel well-framed bombardier's nose glazing from the B subtype with an enlarged, nearly frameless plexiglass bombardier's nose enclosure for improved forward vision. Two experimental versions of the B-17 were flown under different designations: the XB-38 Flying Fortress and the YB-40 Flying Fortress. The XB-38 was an engine testbed for Allison V-1710 liquid-cooled engines, should the right engines normally used on the B-17 become unavailable. The only prototype XB-38 to fly crashed on its 9th flight and the type was abandoned, the V-1710 being kept for fighters. The YB-40 was a heavily armed modification of the standard B-17 used before the North American P-51 Mustang. An effective long-range fighter became available to act as escort. Additional armament included an additional dorsal turret in the radio room, a remotely operated and fired Bendix-built chin turret, and twin 15 guns in each of the waist positions. The ammunition load was over 11,000 rounds. All of these modifications made the YB-40 well over 10,000 pounds heavier than a fully loaded B-17F. The YB-40s with the numerous heavy modifications had trouble keeping up with the lighter bombers once they had dropped the bombs, and so the project was abandoned and finally phased out in July 1943, but not before the final production blocks of the B-17F from Douglas's plants adopted the YB-40's remotely operated and fired Bendix chin turret for a much improved forward defensive weapons installation. By the time the definitive B-17G appeared, the number of guns had been increased from 7 to 13. The designs of the gun stations were finalized, and other adjustments were completed. The B-17G was the final version of the Flying Fortress, incorporating all changes made to its predecessor, the B-17F, adopting the remotely operated chin turret for forward defense from the YB-40 gunship version, and in total 8,680 were built, the last one on the 28th of July 1945. Many B-17 gigaseconds were converted for other missions such as cargo hauling, engine testing and reconnaissance. Initially designated SB-17G, a number of B-17 gigaseconds were also converted for search and rescue duties, later to be redesignated B-17H. Late in World War II, at least 25 B-17s were fitted with radio controls and television cameras, loaded with 20,000 pounds of high explosives and dubbed BQ-7 Aphrodite missiles for Operation Aphrodite. The operation, which involved remotely flying Aphrodite drones onto the targets by accompanying CQ-17 mothership control aircraft, was approved on 26 June 1944, and assigned to the 388th Bombardment Group stationed at RAF Furs Field of Satellite of RAF Nettishall. The first 4 drones were sent to Mimiex, the Sarak V-1 bunker, Watin and Wizens on 4 August, causing little damage. The project came to a sudden end with the unexplained mid-air explosion over the Blythe estuary of a B-24, part of the United States Navy's contribution as Project Anvil, en route for Heligoland, piloted by Lieutenant Joseph P. Kennedy, Jr., future U.S. President John F. Kennedy's elder brother. Blast damage was caused over a radius of 5 miles. British authorities were anxious that no similar accidents should again occur, and the Aphrodite project was scrapped in early 1945.